Clara Bell found the letter nailed to the church door before sunrise, its torn edge fluttering like a wounded bird in the river wind. And by noon, every soul in Mercy Crossing had read the accusation inside. It said the church pianist had taken charity money, lured honest men down the wrong road, and hid a shameful past beneath hymn music and lowered eyes. At the river crossing, with wagons backed up behind her and the preacher refusing to look her way, Clara stood alone while the same men who had shamed her waited for the town to cast her out. Then a riderless horse came stumbling from the cottonwoods with blood on the saddle, and a scrap of her music tied to the reins. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The sun had not yet climbed over the eastern ridge when Clara Bell reached for the church key beneath the loose stone by the steps. Every morning for 3 years, she had opened the little white church before anyone else in Mercy Crossing stirred. She would sweep prairie dust from the floorboards, trim the wicks in the wall lamps, set fresh water in the chip pitcher near the pulpit, and sit at the old upright piano while the town was still soft with sleep. Music was easier before people came in. Music did not ask why she had arrived alone on the westbound train with one trunk, one black dress, and no family name anyone recognized. Music did not ask why she flinched when men laughed too loudly outside the saloon. Music did not whisper that a woman with no kin must have done something to lose them. That morning the key felt cold in her hand. A gust came down from the river and moved the cottonwood leaves in a shivering silver sound. Then Clara saw the letter. It had been fixed to the church door with a horseshoe nail driven clean through the top of the page. The paper was cheap, gray at the fold, and marked with rain spots though the night had been dry. Her name was written across the front in a bold, ugly hand. Miss Clara Bell. For a moment, she only stood there with her shawl gathered tight at her throat. She knew, before she pulled the nail loose, the body often knows danger before the mind has words for it. Inside the letter were 3 sentences. The pianist who plays for widows and children has been stealing from the church poor box. Ask her about the men she left ruined east of here. Ask why the road south from Mercy Crossing is not safe when she is near. No signature, no proof, no mercy. Clara read it once, then again. Her breath shortened until the church steps tilted beneath her feet. The poor box stood under the front window, a plain wooden thing with a brass slot and a small lock. It held coins for flour, medicine, burial cloth, and train fare when somebody had nowhere else to turn. She had guarded that box like it was a child. Her first thought was to burn the letter in the stove before the town woke. Her second was that someone had wanted her to think that. The church bell rope shifted in the wind and tapped against the wall. Across the street, lantern light came alive in Mr. Dobbin's general store. A dog barked by the livery. From farther off came the low whistle of the morning train, crawling across the prairie toward Mercy Crossing, its sound thin and lonely in the blue hour. Clara folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She unlocked the church. By 7, the town had begun to gather itself. Wagons rolled in from outlying farms. Women in bonnets stepped onto porches and shook rugs. Men watered horses, bought tobacco, and leaned together with the grave pleasure of hearing something ruinous before breakfast. Clara felt the news move before she heard it. A head turning too quickly, a conversation stopping as she passed the window. A boy from the mercantile staring at her pocket as if the letter might show through the cloth. At 8, Reverend Ames came in without his usual greeting. He was a narrow man with a narrow beard and kind eyes that grew less kind whenever the deacons stood near. He removed his hat, looked at the piano, then at Clara's hands. "Miss Bell," he said, "there is talk. There is always talk. Reverend, this is not ordinary talk." She took the folded letter from her pocket and held it out. "Then you ought to read the thing that started it. He did not reach for it right away. That hesitation hurt more than the accusation. When he finally read the letter, his lips tightened. "You know I did not take money from the poor box," Clara said. "I would like to believe that." She looked at him. "You would like to?" He colored slightly. "The box was found open this morning." The room went still around her. "I locked it last night," she said. "I know you say so. I did lock it." He lowered his voice. "Clara, last Sunday's collection was large. The Wilkes family gave $10 for Mrs. Kavanaugh's operation. The money is gone." She stepped back as if his words had touched her physically. Gone. $10 was not a fortune to cattlemen or railroad buyers, but to Mrs. Kavanaugh, coughing blood, in a one-room house with 3 children, it was life measured in coins. Clara turned toward the little poor box. The lock hung crooked from its latch. Someone had forced it, but not clumsily. The scrape marks were neat, deliberate, almost careful. Who found it? Mr. Harrow. The name entered the church like dust. Silas Harrow owned the freight yard, 2 saloons, most of the empty lots south of town, and enough secrets to make ordinary men call him respectable. He was handsome in a polished way, with a silver watch chain and boots that never seemed to know mud. He had once asked Clara to play piano in the back room of his Golden Spur saloon for twice what the church paid her. When she refused, he smiled as if she had promised him something. "He came before sunrise?" Clara asked. "He said he saw the church door standing open. It was locked when I arrived." Reverend Ames folded the letter. "There will be a meeting at the river crossing after the supply wagons are searched." "The river crossing?" "The south road is blocked. A teamster was found beaten near Willow Bend. He claims he was directed there by a woman matching your description." Clara stared at him. "That is a lie. I am telling you what he said. No woman is safe. Once a man learns, the town will believe him." The Reverend's eyes softened then, but not enough. "Come to the crossing. Speak plainly. Let this be answered before it grows." Clara almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because men often said "let this be answered" when they meant let the woman stand in the dust until shame finished its work. She put on her bonnet, tied the ribbons with hands that trembled only once, and walked out of the church without playing a note. By noon, Mercy Crossing had emptied itself toward the river. The crossing lay half a mile south of town, where the road dropped between cottonwoods and slid through shallow brown water before climbing toward open range. Freighters used it, ranchers used it, and travelers with no wish to pay Harrow's toll road used it when the river ran low. That day, wagons were backed up along both banks. Horses stamped and shook flies from their necks. Men stood in clusters, hats low, voices rough. Women watched from wagon seats and did not call Clara's name. Silas Harrow stood near the water with 2 of his men, Cal Voss and Emmett Rust. Both wore long coats despite the heat. Both had faces that looked made for darkness. The beaten teamster sat on a crate with a bandage around his head, looking frightened enough to be useful. Clara saw the accusation waiting in every eye. She had crossed that road many times with hymn books in her satchel. She had walked beside grieving widows there. She had carried soup to sick children in houses beyond the bend. Now the same ground seemed to rise against her. Harrow removed his hat. "Miss Bell, we are all sorry to see you brought into such a matter." "No," Clara said. "You are not." A murmur moved through the crowd. Harrow's smile did not change. "The teamster says a woman in a dark dress waved him off the main road last evening. Said the bridge plank was out. He followed the lower track and found men waiting. I was at the church last evening. Alone. I often am. That is unfortunate." She turned to the crowd. "I did not send any man down Willow Bend. I did not steal from the poor box. Whoever wrote that letter knew both lies would meet here." "Then where is the money?" someone called. "And why did the horse come from the south road?" another voice said. Clara's throat tightened. "What horse?" As if summoned by the question, A shout rose from the far bank. A bay gelding staggered from the cottonwoods, reins dragging, sides lathered white. The animal's saddle was empty. Blood darkened the leather near the cantle. Tied to the right rein with a strip of blue ribbon was a folded scrap of paper. The crowd pulled back as the horse stumbled into the shallow river and stopped, trembling. Clara knew the ribbon. It had been tied around a bundle of sheet music she kept at the church. One of Harrow's men reached for the paper, but another hand got there first. A tall rancher in a dust-gray hat stepped from the far side of the crossing and caught the gelding by the cheek strap down. He moved calmly, speaking low to the animal, his body placed between the horse and the crowd. Clara knew him by sight. Jonah Reed of Flint Ridge, a widower, a horse breeder, a man who came to church twice a month and sat in the back pew with his little daughter asleep against his coat. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then used few words, as if each one cost feed money. He untied the paper, looked at the ribbon, and then at Clara. "My eye?" he asked. She nodded because she had no voice left. Jonah unfolded the scrap. "It's music paper," he said. "What does it say?" Harrow demanded. Jonah's jaw worked once. "It says she will pay at the crossing," a woman gasped. Harrow lifted his hands. "You see? Even the message follows her." Jonah turned the paper over. "And there is a freight stamp on the back." The crowd shifted. Harrow's smile thinned. "A stamp means nothing. Paper passes through many hands. Then you will not mind if it is kept safe," Jonah said. Harrow stepped closer. "This is a town matter, Reed." "Ah, bleeding horse made it a road matter." The quiet in Jonah's voice cut more sharply than a shout. Cal Voss put his hand near his pistol. Jonah did not move, but the gelding settled under his touch. Clara watched him, bewildered by the simple fact that he had not stepped away from her. Reverend Ames cleared his throat. "Miss Bell, perhaps you should return to town until—" "No," Jonah said. Every face turned. She should not walk back alone with men accusing her of every crime that came down the South Road. "And what do you propose?" Harrow asked. Jonah looked across the river toward the bend. "I propose we find the rider." The gelding belonged to a young courier named Daniel Pike, who carried bank drafts, land papers, and letters between Mercy Crossing and the rail office 40 miles east. He was known for singing too loudly and trusting too quickly. By late afternoon, Jonah found him in a wash beyond Willow Bend, half conscious, one arm twisted beneath him, his face gray with pain. Clara had followed against the Reverend's wishes, so had half the town, though most kept their distance after Jonah turned once in the saddle and said, "Crowding a hurt man never healed him." Daniel Pike woke when Clara knelt beside him. His eyes widened. "No," he whispered, "not you." Clara drew back as if struck. Jonah crouched on the other side. "Who did this?" Daniel's lips cracked when he tried to speak. "Road, wrong road," woman said. Clara closed her eyes. Harrow, who had ridden behind them with two men, called out, "There it is." Jonah did not look away from Daniel. "What woman?" Daniel swallowed. "Blue ribbon, music." Clara pressed one hand to the dirt. Jonah saw it. His face changed, not with doubt, but with understanding that pain could be made worse by witnesses. "Daniel," he said, "listen careful. Did you see her face?" The young man blinked against the sun. "Well, what did her voice sound like?" "Low, not like." He turned his eyes toward Clara. "Not like hymns." A murmur rose. Jonah leaned closer. Who was waiting at the bend? Daniel's gaze drifted past him toward the riders. Fear entered his face so fast it seemed to sober him. "Did you know them?" Jonah asked. Daniel shut his eyes. "No," but his hand moved, weak and trembling, and gripped Jonah's sleeve. Jonah understood. They carried Daniel to the Kavanaugh place because it was nearest, and Mrs. Kavanaugh, sick though she was, had once been a nurse in Kansas. By evening, a storm gathered in a green-black line beyond the western hills. The town returned unsettled, half convinced and half hungry for a cleaner answer than confusion. Clara walked back beside Jonah's horse, while Daniel lay across a wagon bed. "You should not have come," Jonah said. "I have been told where I should not go all my life. It has never saved me." He glanced down at her. "No, I reckon not." That was all. Yet there was no judgment in it, and she found herself almost undone by the absence of cruelty. At Mrs. Kavanaugh's cabin, lanterns were lit early. Rain began tapping the roof just as Jonah set Daniel on the bed. Clara brought water, tore clean cloths, and held the lamp while Mrs. Kavanaugh examined the wound at his ribs. The storm pressed close, filling the room with the smell of wet dust and fear. Harrow appeared at the doorway before Doc, hat in hand, polite as Sunday. "The boy should be taken to town," he said. "Doctor can see him proper there." Mrs. Kavanaugh coughed into a cloth. "Doctor is in Abilene till morning. Then my men will guard him." Jonah stood between Harrow and the bed. "No." Harrow's eyes cooled. "You keep using that word with me. It is a good word when needed. Careful, Reed. You have a little girl out on that ridge and a ranch note due in September." The cabin went silent. Clara saw Jonah's shoulders harden, though his voice stayed low. "Say what you came to say." "I came to offer help, but I will say this besides. A widower with debts should not hitch his name to a woman under suspicion." Jonah took one step forward. "A man with clean hands would not need to ward me off for a breath." The storm itself seemed to pause. Harrow put his hat back on. "Mercy Crossing has always been kind to you, Miss Bell. Do not repay it by dragging decent people into your old troubles." "My old troubles," Clara said. "Seem to know your handwriting." His smile returned. "Be careful what you claim without proof." After he left, thunder rolled over the cabin. Jonah moved to the small window and watched until Harrow's lanterns disappeared down the road. Clara stood near the stove, arms wrapped around herself. Mrs. Kavanaugh bent over Daniel, but the old woman's eyes flicked between them. "You know Harrow," Jonah said. Clara looked at the floor. "I know men like him." "That was not my question." "No." He waited. She could have lied. She had learned to survive by folding truth small enough to carry. But Jonah had found Daniel, protected the message, and stood in a doorway while a powerful man measured the cost of helping her. He deserved more than a folded answer. "I knew Cal Voss," she said. Jonah's gaze sharpened. "Not as he is now. Years ago, in Missouri. I was 17. My father played fiddle in mining camps. My mother took in washing until fever took her. After that, we followed work and church suppers, anything that kept us fed." She drew a breath. Cal was a stage driver then. Handsome, loud, generous with other men's money. He promised marriage. He promised a home. He promised I would never again have to play piano for coins while drunk men shouted over the music. Jonah said nothing. I believed him, because I wanted to be the kind of girl promises came true for. Then he used my name on a debt paper. When the money vanished, he vanished with it. My father tried to follow and was beaten outside freight yard. He lived 3 days. Rain struck harder. Clara's voice thinned, but did not break. The town said I had helped Cal cheat the lender. They said no honest girl would keep such company. I took my father's watch, sold it for train fare, and came west. Mercy Crossing was the first place that let me sit at a church piano without asking too much. And now Cal is here, Jonah said. With Harrow. Does Harrow know all of it? He knows enough. Cal must have told him. Or sold it. Jonah turned back to the window. That is why the letter said men ruined east of here. Yes, Daniel stirred on the bed, whispering. Mrs. Kavanaugh leaned close. What is it, boy? His words came broken. Ledger of freight. South Road. Then he slept again. Jonah met Clara's eyes. The first misunderstanding had not been a misunderstanding at all. It was a trap built from an old wound, placed at the exact point where the whole town could watch her step into it. At dawn, the storm had washed the road into ribbons of mud. Daniel lived, but fever took hold of him. Mrs. Kavanaugh needed medicine from town, and Jonah needed to get back to Flint Ridge before his daughter woke frightened and alone with only old Mr. Sutter, the hired hand, to mind her. Clara offered to go for the medicine. "No," Jonah said. "I know the town. I know which shelf the quinine is on at Dobbins. You also know half that town is ready to see guilt in how you tie your bonnet. Then let them look." He studied her a moment. "Can you ride?" "I can stay on if the horse is merciful." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "I have one merciful horse." They rode together through the washed morning. Clara on a brown mare named Mercy because, Jonah said, she had never thrown a soul who did not deeply deserve it. The joke was so dry Clara nearly missed it. When she glanced at him, she found the smile gone, but a warmth left behind. Flint Ridge lay north of town, where the prairie rose into stony pasture and the wind came clean. Jonah's ranch was not grand, but it was cared for. The barn doors hung straight. The corrals were mended with new rails beside old ones. A line of wet shirts snapped near the house. Chickens scattered from the porch as they rode in. A little girl of 6 stood in the doorway, wearing a nightdress, boots, and a man's hat far too large for her head. "Papa," she called, trying hard not to sound relieved. Jonah dismounted. "Mabel Reed, why are you wearing my Sunday hat in the rain? You were gone." "That explains the boots, not the hat. I needed authority." Clara turned her face away so the child would not see her smile. Mabel looked past her father with solemn brown eyes. "Are you the piano lady?" "I am. Folks said you stole church money." "Mabel," Jonah said softly. Clara lifted a hand. "It's all right. Folks say many things. Did you?" "No." The child considered this, then nodded once. "Papa does not bring thieves home unless they're horses." "Mabel, well, Jasper bites apples from pockets." Jonah rubbed a hand over his face, and Clara laughed despite herself. The sound surprised all three of them. Inside the house, Clara found warmth that did not ask permission. A kettle simmered. A quilt lay half-mended over a chair. On the mantel stood a tintype of a woman with gentle eyes and Mabel's chin. Jonah saw Clara notice it. "My wife, Ruth," he said, "gone 4 years. I am sorry. She made the house kinder than I knew how to keep it." Clara looked at the neat room, the small boots by the stove, the braided rug repaired with feed sack strips. "It still remembers her." That answer seemed to reach him more deeply than pity would have. He took the medicine list from his pocket and set it on the table. "Mabel, Miss Bell will stay here while I ride to Dobbins." "I can go," Clara said. "You can help Mabel with breakfast. She burns biscuits with confidence." "I heard that," Mabel said. "You were meant to." Jonah left before Clara could argue further. The morning at Flint Ridge unfolded in practical tasks. Clara helped Mabel roll biscuit dough and learned the child like hymns only if sung faster than church allowed. She fed chickens, washed mud from Daniel's blood-stained bandages, and set them to boil. She found the sheet music ribbon missing from her satchel and remembered with cold certainty that it had been tied around the riderless horse. Someone had entered the church room where she kept her things. When Jonah returned near noon, his expression told her the town had not grown kinder overnight. "Harrow called a council for Sunday," he said. "He wants you removed from the church post until the poor box money is found." "Removed?" Clara repeated. "He says it is temporary. Men like that always call a hanging temporary until the rope tightens." Jonah set the medicine on the table. "Dobbins would not sell on church credit. I will repay you." "I know." The simple confidence in it struck her. Not charity, not pity, A debt between equals. Mabel tugged Clara's sleeve. Can you play our piano? We do not have a piano, Jonah said. We have Mama's hymn book. The child brought it from a shelf. Its pages were worn soft at the corners, some marked in Ruth Reed's careful hand. Clara opened it and found a song she knew. With no instrument, she sang quietly while rain dripped from the eaves. Her voice was not large, but it was steady. Mabel leaned against her father's knee. Jonah stood by the window, hat in his hands, and listened as if the room had opened a door he had kept shut for years. When the song ended, no one spoke right away. Then Jonah said, Ruth used to sing that one when calves were being born in a storm. Did it help the calves? No. Help me. Trust did not arrive in a blaze. It came in small, work-worn pieces. Jonah showing Clara where the spare coffee was kept. Clara teaching Mabel to count hymn beats by tapping spoons on the table. Jonah riding her back to Mrs. Kavanaugh's cabin before dusk without asking whether she feared the road. Clara admitting she did and going anyway. Over the next 2 days, Mercy Crossing divided itself into those who believed Clara guilty, those who doubted but were afraid to say so, and those who enjoyed the spectacle too much to care. The church poor box remained empty. Daniel drifted in fever, speaking now and then of a ledger, a red seal, a road, and a man with a silver watch chain. On Saturday afternoon, Jonah brought a sack of feed to Mrs. Kavanaugh's and found Clara sitting on the back step with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. What happened? She opened her palm. Inside lay a brass key. I found it in Daniel's coat lining. Jonah picked it up. Freight office key. Yes, the ledger he spoke of. My bad. The freight office belonged to Harold. They both looked toward town, where smoke rose from chimneys and church bells waited silent in their steeple. If there is a ledger, Jonah said, it might show who took money from travelers on the South Road, and who robbed Daniel, and who broke the church poor box. Clara closed her hand around the key. Then we get it. He shook his head. I get it. No, Clara, no. She stood, and though fear showed in her face, so did something older than fear. My name is on that letter. My ribbon was tied to that horse. My past is being used like a rope. I will not sit by the stove while another man rides into danger on my account. Jonah's eyes held hers. You are accustomed to standing alone. Yes. You might have to learn something harder. What is that? Standing with someone. The freight office sat beside the rail spur at the edge of town, a long wooden building smelling of oil, burlap, and iron dust. At night, trains passed like moving thunder, shaking the windows and sending sparks up into the black sky. Harrow kept the office locked after sundown. The men came and went through the back door when honest business was asleep. Clara and Jonah waited until the 10 o'clock train screamed past Mercy Crossing, its engine throwing steam over the platform. In the roar and confusion, they crossed behind stacked crates and reached the side door. Clara's hand shook as she fitted Daniel's key into the lock. It turned. Inside, Jonah lit a hooded lantern. The small flame revealed ledgers stacked on a desk, freight tags hanging from nails, a safe in the corner, and mud on the floor that had dried in ridged tracks. Clara went first to the desk. You have done this before? Jonah whispered. I kept church accounts 3 years. Sin and arithmetic both leave marks. He gave her a look that almost became another smile. She opened the largest ledger and scanned columns of names, payments, destinations. Most seemed ordinary. Then she saw a repeated notation beside certain shipments. SR, delay fee, South Road recovery, private toll, Jonah. He came close. These are not legal charges. No, and look. She pointed to a date. The Wilkes donation was deposited with Harrow for safekeeping last Monday. $10, Harrow said. It was in the poor box. He lied. Clara turned more pages. Her pulse beat hard in her throat. There are church funds mixed into his freight accounts, not just ours. Widow collections, burial funds, aid money. A sound came from the rear of the building. Jonah closed the ledger and blew the lantern down to a thread of light. Clara stood frozen. Voices approached from outside. Calvas laughed softly. He will not talk if he knows what keeps him breathing. Emmett Russ answered. Harrow says the pianist is near broke. Could blame her for the lot. She was always easy to blame. Clara's stomach turned. Jonah's hand found her elbow, steady and warm. He guided her behind stacked flour sacks just as the back door opened. Lantern lights spread across the floorboards. Cal and Russ entered with mud on their boots and pistols at their hips. Russ dropped a small cloth pouch on the desk. Coins spilled out. Cal picked up the ledger Clara had just closed. Boss wants this moved before Sunday. The whole book, the marked pages. Burn the rest if you like, Russ spat. Shame. I cannot read, but I like the look of money in columns. Cal laughed, then he stopped. His gaze had fallen on the side door. Block his turn. Jonah moved before thought could catch him. He shoved Clara toward the shadowed aisle between crates and stepped into view. Cal drew his pistol halfway. Read? Evening. You lost? Found more than I meant to. Russ raised his gun. Clara saw the ledger on the desk. Without it, truth might burn. With it, Jonah might die. She did the only thing her body chose before fear could forbid it. She grabbed a hanging freight hook and knocked over a stack of tin lamp reflectors. The crash exploded through the office like a cavalry charge. Russ startled and fired while the bullet punching through the roof. Jonah lunged, catching Cal by the wrists. The two men slammed into the desk. Clara seized the ledger and ran. Stop her, Cal shouted. She did not stop. She flew through the side door into the smoke of the rail yard, skirts snatching at her knees. Ledger clutched to her chest. Behind her came the sounds of struggle, a grunt, another shot, then Jonah calling her name. A train was still moving slowly beyond the platform, boxcars clanking. Clara ducked between them after the brakeman swung aboard, crossed the tracks and nearly fell into a ditch. She kept running until she reached the dark mouth of the livery alley. There, a hand caught her. She tried to scream, but Jonah's voice whispered, "It is May." He had blood at his temple and a torn sleeve, but he was on his feet. "You are hurt?" "Not enough. They saw you. They already knew me." They hurried through back lanes to Mrs. Kavanaugh's cabin. By the time they arrived, Clara's lungs burned and Jonah's face had gone pale. Mrs. Kavanaugh swore softly when she saw the blood, then set him in a chair and stitched the cut with hands that trembled only from illness, not fear. The ledger lay open on the table. Daniel woke just before dawn. His eyes were clearer. "Harrow," he whispered. Clara leaned close. "We know." Daniel shook his head weakly. "Not just Harrow. The county land agent. These changed. Homesteads taken. South Road men scare folks off. Papers vanish." Jonah looked sharply at the ledger. His ranch note, his September debt, Harrow's warning. Clara understood at the same time he did. Flint Ridge was not only near the South Road. It sat on land Harrow wanted, land that could connect his toll route to the rail spur. Daniel swallowed. "I carried copies." "Hidden where?" Jonah asked. "Church piano." Clara went still. Daniel's eyes found hers. "I saw them watching freight office. Hid packet where no man would look. Behind loose board. Piano back. The church piano. Her refuge. Her daily work. The place her hands had gone when words failed. And all this time, proof had rested inside it. Sunday came bright after the storm, washed clean and cruelly beautiful. Church bells rang at 9, though Clara had not been asked to play. By 10, the pews were full. Farmers, merchants, freight hands, wives, children, and ranchers pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the rafters. Harrow sat in the front row, silver watch chain gleaming. Cal Voss stood near the back door with a bruised cheek and one hand tucked inside his coat. Reverend Ames looked as if he had not slept. Clara entered last. The room fell silent. She wore the same dark dress she had worn the morning. The letter was nailed to the door. Her bonnet was plain. Her face was pale. Jonah walked beside her, not touching, but near enough that every person understood he had chosen his place. Mabel Reed sat with Mrs. Cavanaugh and Daniel, who had insisted on being brought in on a wagon mattress despite fever and pain. His presence stirred whispers before a word was spoken. Reverend Ames cleared his throat. This gathering is to address matters concerning Miss Clara Bell and the missing church funds. Harrow stood smoothly, and the safety of our roads. Jonah placed the ledger on the communion table. The sound of it landing was small, but it changed the room. Harrow's eyes flickered. Clara walked to the piano. She had opened its back before the service and found Daniel's packet, wrapped in oilcloth behind a loose board, exactly where he said it would be. Inside were copied deeds, altered freight receipts, and a page listing payments to men for road intimidation, false claims, and stolen church funds, marked as private holdings. She held up the packet. My name was put on a letter, she said. My ribbon was tied to a bleeding horse. My past was carried here like a sack of dirt and emptied in front of all of you. I will answer what is true. I was once deceived by Cal Voss. He used my trust, and when my father tried to seek justice, men beat him so badly he died. I ran because no one believed me then. Cal moved toward the door. Jonah turned. So did 3 ranchers from the back pew, who had once owed Jonah favors and now seemed ready to repay them. Clara continued, voice shaking but clear. That shame was never mine. It belonged to the men who used it. A woman near the front began to cry softly. Harrow wrote, this is a performance. Papers can be forged. Daniel lifted himself on one elbow. I copied them before you ordered me killed. The church erupted. Harrow pointed at him. A fevered boy. Mrs. Cavanaugh stood, thin as a rail and fierce as judgment. A fevered boy still speaks better truth than a polished thief. Reverend Ames took the papers with white hands. Silas, there are church deposits here, temporary holding, with your private toll charges. Harrow's jaw tightened. You do not understand commerce. Jonah stepped forward. I understand land theft. He took one deed from the packet and held it up. This says Flint Ridge defaulted last month. My note is due in September. The county copy was changed. A murmur ran through the ranchers. Another man stood. My brother lost his claim after papers went missing. Then another. South Road men drove my team off last spring. The crowd shifted, no longer a wall against Clara, but a tide turning. Harrow saw it. His hand moved toward his coat. Clara did not think. She sat at the piano and struck the lowest chord with all her strength. The sound boomed through the church like thunder. Every head snapped toward her. Harrow's motion froze long enough for Jonah to cross the space and seize his wrist. A pistol dropped from Harrow's coat and hit the floorboards. Cal Voss bolted. Men shouted. The back door burst open. Cal ran for his horse tied near the road, but the animal shied at the crowd. He swung into the saddle anyway and tore south down toward the river crossing. For one suspended moment, Clara saw the whole shape of it. The men who had shamed her, the road where they had set their lies, the crossing where the town had nearly surrendered her to disgrace. Then Jonah ran after him. Jonah, Clara cried. He mounted outside and rode hard, not with anger loose in him, but with purpose sharpened by all that was at stake. Several men followed, but Jonah's horse was faster. Clara, heart pounding, gathered her skirts and ran too, though she knew she could never catch mounted men. Mabel called after her. Mrs. Cavanaugh shouted for someone to help. The whole town spilled from the church and moved toward the river. At the crossing, the water ran higher from the storm. Chow tried to force his horse through. but the animal balked at the current. Jonah reached the bank as Cal turned with pistol raised. "Stay back," Cal shouted. Jonah reined it in. The crowd slowed behind him, afraid to move closer. Clara reached the edge of the road, breathless, shoes soaked with mud. Harold had been held at the church, but his poison had run ahead in Cal. Cal's eyes found Clara. For the first time, she saw not charm, not swagger, but panic. "You should have stayed gone," he said. Clara stepped past the men who tried to stop her. Jonah looked at her. "Clara, I am done being chased by a lie." Cal laughed, but it shook. "You think they love you now? They will turn again when wind changes, my bay," Clara said. "But I will not turn against myself." His pistol wavered. "You took my father," she said. "You took my name for a time. You do not get the road too." Cal's face twisted. "I never swung on your father. No, you only pointed men toward him. Same as you pointed Daniel toward the bend. Same as you pointed this town toward me." Behind her, Daniel's weak voice called from the wagon. "I saw your scar, boss. On your hand, you held a lantern." Cal looked toward him, and Jonah moved. It happened fast. Jonah spurred forward at an angle. Cal fired, the shot cracking over the water, and Jonah leaned low from the saddle, striking Cal's arm aside as his horse slammed shoulder to shoulder with the other. Cal fell into the shallows. The pistol vanished in the current. For a moment, the river took him down. Then two ranchers dragged him out coughing, cursing, finished. Jonah dismounted slowly. Blood showed along his upper arm where the bullet had grazed him. Clara crossed the water without caring for her dress. She reached him and pressed both hands over the wound. "You said not enough yesterday," she whispered. "Do not make a habit of it." His breath came hard, but his eyes warmed. "I will try to be less troublesome." Around them, the town stood at the crossing where it had once judged her. No one spoke quickly now. Shame, real shame, had changed owners. Reverend Ames came forward bareheaded, his boots sinking in the mud. "Miss Bell," he said, voice rough, "I failed you." Clara looked at the river, at the road, at the men holding Cal Voss, at the women who could not meet her eyes, at the children listening. "Yes," she said. The Reverend bowed his head. She could have left the word there like a stone. Once she might have needed to. But forgiveness, she was learning, was not pretending harm had not happened. It was refusing to let harm choose the rest of the road. "And you might do better," she said. His eyes lifted, wet and grateful. Silas Harrell was taken before the county marshal 3 days later when a circuit judge arrived by rail. Cal Voss and Emmett Russ were held with him. The ledger and copy deeds opened more doors than anyone expected. Families came with old receipts, altered claims, and stories they had swallowed because powerful men told them swallowing was safer. The Wilkes money was found in Harrow's safe, along with church collections from 2 other settlements. Mrs. Kavanaugh received her operation fund. Daniel Pike, pale but alive, became something of a hero and promised never again to trust a veiled stranger on a lonely road, no matter how official she sounded. Mercy Crossing did not heal in a day. Towns, like people, sometimes apologized in awkward pieces. A sack of flour left at Clara's door, a mended shawl, a quiet morning Miss Bell from a man who had called for her removal. Reverend Ames asked her to return to the piano the following Sunday, and he did so in front of the congregation, not behind the church where shame could be hidden. Clara agreed on one condition. "The poor box gets 3 keys," she said. "One with you, one with Mrs. Kavanaugh, and one with a woman chosen by the widows." Reverend Ames nodded. "And you?" "I have guarded enough lock boxes alone." That Sunday, Clara played with the church windows open. Prairie wind moved through the room, carrying the smell of river mud, horse leather, and clean grass after rain. Her hands trembled on the first hymn, but only for a measure. Then the music steadied. Jonah sat in the back pew with Mabel beside him. His arm was bandaged beneath his coat. When Clara looked up, Mabel gave her a solemn nod as if approving the tempo. After the service, people gathered outside in clusters. Some approached Clara. Some apologized. Some could not find words and only pressed her hand. She accepted what was honest and let the rest pass. Jonah waited near the hitching rail. "You played strong," he said. "I nearly missed the second verse. No one with sense noticed, and those without sense, they might learn." Mabel ran ahead to chase a yellow butterfly near the road. Clara watched her, then looked toward the south where the river crossing lay beyond the cottonwoods. "I thought leaving Missouri meant I had outrun what happened. Roads carry more than we want sometimes. She folded her gloves in her hands. "But they carry people too." Jonah leaned against the rail, gaze steady. "Flint Ridge has a piano now," Clara blinked. "It does not. It will. Bought one from a family heading west. Needs tuning. Missing one ivory key. Heavy as sin. Why would you buy a piano?" "Mabel needs lessons." "She does." She says authority requires smile." "That sounds like Mabel. And I." He stopped, searching for words the way a careful man searches a dark barn for a lantern. "I like hearing the house remember something besides loss." The smile faded from Clara's lips, not from sadness, but because the moment had grown too true for smiling. "Jonah, I cannot be someone's replacement. I would never ask it. I do not know how to belong to a place without waiting for it to cast me out." "Then do not belong to the place first," he said. "Belong to your own name. The rest can take its time." Her eyes filled before she could turn away. He did not reach for her. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. Jonah Reed had never taken a step she had not been free to refuse. "I am asking slow," he said. "Sunday dinners, piano lessons might be a ride now and then when the road is fair. If trouble comes, we stand facing it. If peace comes, we learn that too." Clara looked at his bandaged arm, his worn hat, the little girl laughing in the dust, the church door where a letter had once been nailed like a sentence. "I can begin with Sunday dinner," she said. "That is enough." Weeks passed into high summer. The cottonwoods thickened along the river. The South Road reopened under new county watch, no longer a place of whispered fees and staged fear. Travelers crossed at Mercy Crossing again, and whenever a horse came riderless now, men ran to help, instead of first looking for someone to blame. Clara spent 3 afternoons a week at Flint Ridge teaching Mabel scales on the scarred second-hand piano Jonah had wrestled into the parlor with the help of 3 neighbors and a great deal of regret. The missing ivory key clicked under Clara's finger, but she came to love that flaw. It made the instrument honest. Jonah found reasons to be nearby during lessons, mending harness at the table, sharpening tools on the porch, bringing in water when the bucket was already full. Clara noticed and did not mind. Trust grew in the rhythm of ordinary things. Coffee poured before asking. A horse saddled because he knew she wanted to visit Mrs. Kavanaugh. Mabel saving the last biscuit because Miss Bell makes hymns less stiff. Jonah listening when Clara spoke of her father, not with the greedy curiosity of town gossip, but with the quiet respect due a life before his knowing. One evening in August, the church held a supper by the river crossing to raise funds for families harmed by Harrow's schemes. Tables were set on planks between cottonwoods, lanterns hung from branches, fiddles played near the wagons, and children ran in the dust until their mothers called them back for pie. Clara stood by the water after sunset, away from the lantern crowd, listening to the river slide over stones. She heard Jonah approach, his step familiar now. "They are asking for a song," he said. "They always are. You do not have to." "I know." Across the clearing, Reverend Ames was speaking with Daniel Pike. Mrs. Kavanaugh sat wrapped in a shawl, stronger now, laughing at something Mabel had said. The town looked different in lantern light, not innocent, not fully mended, but trying. Clara looked down at the crossing. This was where they wanted me to break. Jonah stood beside her. You did not. I nearly did. Nearly is not the same. She turned toward him. Why did you believe me that day? He took his time answering. I did not know all of you then, he said. But I knew Harrow, and I knew what a cornered horse looks like when cruel men crowd it. You looked frightened, not guilty. That was enough. No, his eyes met hers. The riderless horse came in bleeding, and everyone looked at you like the blood was yours to answer for. I thought, if Ruth were alive and standing alone, I would hope one decent man asked one more question before the town finished with her. Clara's throat tightened. Ruth must have been loved well. She was. C's voice softened. That does not make loving again a betrayal. Took me years to learn it. I am still learning. The fiddle tune ended. From the tables came voices calling Clara's name. Not as accusation now, but invitation. She drew a breath. Walk with me. Jonah offered his arm. Together they crossed the shallow river, stepping from stone to stone while lantern light trembled on the water. The same road where shame had waited now held wagons, laughter, and the smell of coffee boiling over coals. Men who had once lowered their eyes now made room. Women who had whispered now smiled with humble caution. Children watched as Clara and Jonah came up from the crossing side by side. At the piano that had been hauled from the church for the supper, Clara sat and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she looked toward the south road, dark beyond the lantern glow. Somewhere down that road lay all the lies that had followed her. Somewhere behind her lay the town that had believed them too easily. And beside her stood a man who had asked one more question. She began to play. The hymn rose gently at first, then fuller, carrying over the river and into the open prairie. Jonah stood with Mabel tucked against his side. When Clara reached the second verse, voices joined her. Mrs. Kavanaugh's thin alto, Daniel's uneven tenor, Reverend Ames, humble but sincere. Ranchers, widows, children, freighters, not perfect, not polished, but together. When the last note faded, no one rushed to speak. The river did that for them, moving steadily over stone, taking what had been broken and carrying it toward morning. Jonah stepped close as the lanterns swayed above them. Clara Bell, he said quietly. When you are ready, Flint Ridge has room for more than music. She looked at him, and the fear that rose in her was no longer the all fear of being trapped. It was the tender fear of being offered something good. And if I take my time, I will keep the road open. Her hand found his. At the far edge of the crossing, the south road lay pale beneath the moon. No longer a place where shamed men hid behind darkness, but a road found again by those brave enough to walk it in truth. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then at the lantern-lit faces waiting not to judge her, but to welcome her home. And for the first time in many years, she did not feel like a woman surviving the next accusation. She felt like a woman stepping into a life that had room for her whole name. The church bell rang once in the distance, soft across the prairie wind, and the river carried the sound onward.